The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today wrapping up the South African leg of his three-nation tour of Africa. Blinken is on a charm offensive, hoping to foster stronger relations between the U.S. and the continent of Africa. He says the U.S.'s new strategy on the continent is defending democracy, responding to climate change, and supporting African initiatives to grow economies. Pretty words. But what concrete actions should we be aiming for here? Let's unpack this then with Professor Gilbert Khadiagala. He's Professor of International Relations as well as Director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, and that's at Wits University. Prof, good evening. I've got to thank you for your time. So let's start with the narrative that dominated, that preceded the arrival of Secretary Blinken in South Africa, and that was to suggest that he's here on the continent to counter Russian and Chinese influence in what some were terming a re-emerging new Cold War. And he was at pains to dismiss that, to actually emphasize that, no, I'm here seeking partnerships. What's your sense? Was it really just about seeking partnerships, and the recent visits by people such as Sergei Lavrov of Russia to 4 African nations just a month ago has nothing to do with what we are seeing now?
I think the issues around Russia and China remain very much in the background. I think there was a deliberate move on his part to emphasize the fact that why don't we amplify what holds us together? That means the United States and Africa, rather than really focusing on the negativities and the questions around who else is on this continent, I think was in the background deliberately. It did actually, I think, pay off to some extent, because even here in South Africa, there was disagreement with the foreign minister on the very issues around Ukraine and so on. But I think she put it very strongly that South Africa is an independent state, and therefore it should not be dictated upon by the United States. On the issues of democracy, Africans also know democracy, and therefore I think we need to agree and disagree on these issues. So it's very important for, I think, the United States to understand, listening to the positions of South Africa, and I think wherever else is going to go, the very fact that partnerships actually need to approximate the issues around respect. I think Africa needs to be treated with some respect. Africa is interested in forging a relationship with the U.S. plus other partners. And so we should not contest that issue.
Yeah. In fact, did you pick up the strong theme where he kept on emphasizing that we are not seeking to dictate to you what you should do and who your friends should be. We are here to give you a real choice. And in my reading, that was to then offer the United States as, yes, you've got a friendship with Russia, you've got a friendship with China, but we can be better friends in that you and I have common problems that we can work together and we can solve those problems together. Did you pick up that theme?
Yeah, I did. That was actually the entire spirit of the visit. We share a lot of differences around these issues. We are not friends with Russia or China, but we don't want to force that on you. What we want to do is to speak to you as friends and as allies, but also to be very clear, I think, to Africa or to South Africa that the United States ideally would prefer that you understand the enticing alternatives of working with the United States.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a very nice way of presenting the same problem. Like, I don't want you to be friends with the Chinese or the Russians, but you don't want to do it in the Donald Trump kind of approach or the George Bush kind of approach, which was you are with us or you are not with us. Yeah. So it's a change in tone, but I think it also signals the very fact that The US wants to engage Africa differently. And we have to see whether that is going to be translated in actual policies.
So
but I think he said the right talk.
There's an interesting conversation happening about how the South African Foreign Minister, Minister Naledi Pandor, was firm and assertive. And this had started, by the way, before Antony Blinken arrived in South Africa, because there was that opinion piece that Naledi Pandor issued out in response to the U.S. passing, the U.S. House of Representatives passing a bill that they say is meant to counter, quote-unquote, malign Russian activities in Africa. And basically, she had already started saying before the Secretary of State arrived in South Africa to say that actually this is the United States seeking to punish those countries that don't toe the line on the Russia-Ukraine situation. And in fact, during that media briefing, she was even more firm and even talking to say, we're not going to be bullied.
You see, the expectation about this trip was that Ukraine and Russia are going to feature very prominently. And the bill you've just talked about, which was passed by the House of Representatives and is now before Senate, that's a punitive bill, because what it's going to do is going to punish actually countries like South Africa that have relations with Russia outside, I think the narrowly defined area of food and medicine. But the issue here is the executive branch, which Mr. Blinken represents, has a very different perspective on how to work with Africans, how to work with African countries in a mutual relationship that is going to foster mutual gains. The House of Representatives is another branch of government, and they see these things very differently. A lot of them do not like the Chinese or the Russians. So I think that bill speaks to the tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch, which is saying, this is what we want US foreign policy to be in Africa. We want to fight the Chinese and the Russians. Yeah. The issue is therefore whether the administration can negotiate with the legislative branch in coming up with a compromise position.
It is complex, Prof, and I'm glad you actually talk about those differences between the different branches of the U.S. government, because one of the things that this bill would require would be that Secretary Blinken would need to report regularly to Congress on measures being taken to, quote-unquote, counter malign Russian activities in Africa. But lastly, and I think this is really a big question with limited time, Prof, during this visit, the U.S. Secretary of State is outlining the U.S. strategy towards Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And in it, he identifies 4 pillars. And these have to do with openness, supporting democracies, but also mutual collaboration, economic collaboration as the world economies recover from COVID-19, and lastly, the issues around climate change. And I've been wondering, to what extent are these a fit for the conversations that Africa itself is having about what are the main issues and priorities that hinder development in the continent at this very moment?
I think these are issues that have been very much on the table. Both the US and a lot of African countries really have been trying to grapple with these issues. The bigger problem is whether there are enough resources, for instance, around climate change, whether the US can put enough resources in helping African countries deal with these issues. The problem with policy statements of this nature is that they are essentially promises. They are often not fully implementable. But I think we are saying Africa has also been, in fact, engaged in this very issue of post-conflict reconstruction, post-COVID reconstruction, and they also want to engage the United States on this issue. So I think the interesting thing about the visit is that this strategy was unveiled in South Africa, And it's going to set the tone, therefore, for U.S.-Africa relations for at least the Biden administration. We don't know whether he's going to win re-election in 2024. If he doesn't, maybe this strategy doesn't make sense anymore after 2024. But I think we should hold the administration to what it's promising as a good partnership with African countries.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights here on eNCA this evening. That's Professor Gilbert Khadiagala from Wits University. We've been unpacking the visit by the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He's, of course, moving on to the DRC as well as Rwanda. Yes, Rwanda. Yeah, for a moment I got myself confused there because this is not his first visit to the African continent. So you sort of get the countries mixed up from time to time.